Mark Berger is the well-traveled founder and chief executive of the company called Alpha Gates. It's an organization that provides commercial support services for international investors, organizations and contractors in challenging environments. And it cut its teeth in Iraq. Previously, Mark served as an officer in the British Army. He also has experience in sales, retail and corporate finance. In 2003, Mark was involved in a project to develop the currency of Iraq. Today, we will be discussing the Iraq currency exchange, trading and cultural assimilation, and banking. Welcome to ANN Television. Thank you for being with us today. Our guest is Mark Berger. With Mark, we'll be discussing three unusual subjects. One is the Iraq money exchange after the fall of Saddam. The second is, well, cultural issues when you come to relationships between Western businessmen moving into the Middle East and the cultural disconnect that can happen. And the third subject is banking, banking in the Middle East. Three unusual subjects, but with a very fascinating man, and just bear with us as we get started. Mark, thank you so much for being with us, being our guest today on ANN Television. It's great to have you.
William, it's great to be with you again, especially since you've come back from your recent bout of travelling and you're looking very well and healthy.
Excellent. Okay, well, we will move straight into our first subject, the Iraq money exchange. After the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, there was an initiative known as the Iraq currency exchange to unite the two Iraq currencies at that time and remove all fraudulent currency. This project was larger than the Marshall Plan and briefer. At the time, pioneers could be seen walking through the streets, physically collecting the money. At the same time, flights were landing filled with the money that was to replace it, 90 tons at a time. This project managed to collect and remove 15,000 tons in weight of money. The physical business of the currency exchange lasted some 17 weeks, and Mark Berger was involved right up till the end. So Mark, this money exchange, this is where I mean, obviously you'd been a soldier in the region before, but then you cut your teeth with, as far as Iraq is concerned, this was your first project, was after the fall of Saddam in 2003, the big money exchange project.
It was a fascinating project. To start off with, I was in fact a soldier, but never in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And my experience was during the Cold War, and only for a short time. And my career took a patchy route to getting to Iraq. And the currency exchange, the Iraq currency exchange, to give it its official title, was one of the top priorities of the imposed administration in Iraq. It was deemed a highly successful project, and it was the most fascinating project to be involved with. And I'm delighted to share some experiences of that with you.
Well, I'm grateful. I mean, yes, you're a great raconteur. I'd be fascinated to hear. So you were, just to set the scene, you were employed by the administration in Iraq, Bremer and the ilk, and you were exchanging Saddam Hussein dinars for the modern Iraq dinar, carrying money around the country.
Exactly. The currencies in Iraq during Saddam's time was initially the Iraqi dinar, known as the Saddam dinar, and in later times after the first Gulf War, because the first Gulf War triggered the a separate currency in the Kurdish region of Iraq, and which was colloquially known as the Swiss dinar, because the notes were printed in Switzerland. Apparently, the notes were very different and acquired a far greater value. One of the reasons, there were two key reasons, it seemed, three key reasons possibly, to have the currency exchange. And remember, I wasn't involved with the politics. I was merely a tool, a pawn on the chessboard at the end. Were firstly to get rid of Saddam's face, which was not deemed suitable for a post-Saddam environment. Secondly, the Kurdish economy had zoomed ahead in relative terms to the rest of Iraq, and that was important. And the third reason related to the second reason was there was an awful lot of counterfeit currency in the rest of Iraq, especially during the 5 years before the Second Gulf War, which were colloquially, well, within Iraq known as the miracle years, because people were surviving off the equivalent of $5 a month by repute. It was a massive grey economy. As Iraq had not recovered from its efforts during the Iran-Iraq War. So that set the scene.
I remember those days. I mean, a kilo of meat would have cost as much as a month's salary for most people. It was a terrible time because you in those last years of Saddam, you had a situation where malnutrition. I mean, the fact that grown-ups like you and me would be eating rice all day wouldn't matter so much, but children, the lack of protein in their diet caused all sorts of problems.
The whole country was an enigma, and it must have been an enigma to the rest of the world, or for anybody considering whether it's nutrition or the simple economies of where in the world can you exist, either officially or unofficially, off an average of $5 a month. Yet people did, clearly very malnourished, but equally the type of relationship between families and connected regional and social units did seem to ensure that there was a relatively high survival rate and a thriving rate. And one of the most impressive signals that I saw for the potential for Iraq during 2003 was the fact that when we were on the streets physically exchanging the currency, you could look into people's eyes and you didn't get very many thousand-mile stares. You got bright twinkling eyes, and even the young were learning the English language because they could see that that was a way forward. And they'd taken great personal risks to learn the English language because television wasn't permitted in Iraq apart from the officially sanctioned state TV, which was in Arabic.
In Saddam's time.
In Saddam's time.
But I mean, so you were exchanging currency on the street?
What happened was the project had a project manager, which was a large American consulting company, and then two divisions underneath that, a logistics division and a security division. I was attached to the security division, and it was a commercial contract awarded through the United States government to a British security company, and I was bolted on as a consultant to that. I had a fairly lowly job, but it was at a perfect it was a perfect opportunity to have the minimum amount of technical responsibility but the maximum freedom. Hence I was able to travel pretty freely throughout Iraq and gained my experiences which are so deeply ingrained. I'm very happy to talk about them, whether it's now or in 20 or 30 years' time.
Well, tell us one or two. You chose this particular subject. What comes to mind?
Well, let's just start with the fact that we had our own air force to distribute the currency to the major centres in Iraq on an experimental basis. Experimental being to see if the airplanes and helicopters could fly and land safely with the currency, and then we had our own fleet of delivery wagons to take them to the central banks within each governorate. Iraq, as many people may know, is divided into 17 governorates, including the 3 governorates in the Kurdistan region. And each governorate has a central bank, or at least the government bank, which is denoted its governorate central bank. And there were 2 main banks, the Rashid and the Rafidain banks, which were government owned, 3 more which were supposedly operating and were government owned. And then after 2003, a raft of private banks came in. But that was after we'd exchanged the currency. So our own private air force, number 1, pretty unique. We had great big Russian freighters and some large Russian transport helicopters. And these were large. The aeroplanes used to deliver the currency into Iraq were Boeing 747s, the jumbo jet, same size as the US Air Force One, and 90 tons at a time would be delivered into Baghdad airport and warehoused within Baghdad. So just imagining the volume of money, let alone its value, was extraordinary. So that's big takeaway number 1. We had our own air force to do this job.
And you were exchanging the money rather than just doling it out.
Exactly. It was a 2-way process. We were officially meant to collect, and I can remember the figures in tons rather than amounts of money, about 11,000 tons of money. This was the official amount in weight of Iraqi dinars and so Swiss dinars, Saddam dinars and Swiss dinars that had been printed. And in fact, we picked up 15,000 tons, in theory showing 4,000 tons of counterfeit currency. Yet, surprisingly, not a single counterfeit note, to my knowledge, was officially collected. And that in part was because banks couldn't be bothered to count the money. It would have taken literally years, and there was only 17 weeks for the entire exchange to happen. So the banks would automatically exchange 95% of your currency for the new currency on a 1-to-1 basis for the Saddam dinar, and 150-to-1 basis for the Swiss dinar, more of which I can tell you in a second, and without counting it, to save them the time and the effort.
So particular, give us one anecdote from your days on the money exchange business.
Gosh, there are many. I think one only has to start with virtually day one. My job was to my technical job was called a liaison officer, and I liaised between the project that I was working with, the military, sometimes American military, sometimes other coalition military, and with the banks, starting with the central bank, but mainly the regional central banks. And we had no maps, so we had to find our way to where we were going. And the very first day, we went out to discover a place quite close to Baghdad, where we were staying, called Fallujah. And we knew the American military was camped at the edge of Fallujah, and we knew that they had been instructed to support us by giving us somewhere to sleep and some food. Well, somewhere to sleep turned out to be the equivalent of an old garden shed and a greenhouse for our little reconnaissance team of 8 of us, and the particular sort of pests and flies and fleas and gnats in there meant that the next day we were absolutely covered in all sorts of unspeakable sort of spots and things like that. Yes. So that was a lesson learnt to cross-check what we were doing and to make sure that the support given was the right support. And we can then flick into the next mode, which was a couple of months later. By the time we'd really got the lines of communication working well with the American generals in charge of the Fallujah area, we said we were going to deliver some currency, and could they be on standby to support us? But we didn't really want their active support with tanks and American military helicopters flying over us, because the dust cloud of us arriving 15 kilometres away could alert people who might want to have some of the money that we were carrying. But of course, in this instance, the Americans had just heard the word support, not please be on standby to help us.
Yeah.
And we had the most magnificent sort of cavalry support as we went into town. But that itself didn't help relationships.
Yes, I remember. I mean, Fallujah was not a happy place over time. Of course, you had the Blackwater incident, that the stringing up of those boys, that was, well, I guess, a reaction to the way people treated them, and then subsequently the siege of Fallujah, and a brutal siege.
But William, we were starting in an environment of a complete vacuum and anarchy. So we experienced between September 2003 and finishing in February, maybe March, early March 2004, a relatively open-armed support for what we were doing across Iraq. As our project went on, of course, there were people who didn't want us to exchange the currency. They didn't want us to see a success in this way. So we had to take more care. But equally, we knew the lie of the ground better, some of the local politics a little bit better, or changing politics. And the Blackwater incident in Fallujah was in April 2004, and the first battle of Fallujah, so to speak, was in November 2004, which was after we'd finished our particular part of the job, and after we'd changed the currency over. So we were operating
by April then.
We'd finished by March and were sent home. The physical exchange was a 17-week program, which started at the end of September or early October and finished by about February, and the rest of the time was a build-up and a wind down. It was a very fast program. In numerical size, it was larger than the Marshall Plan, and all sorts of fantastic statistics can be thrown out about the project itself. But we were operating in a fairly benign environment. I have to say, though, that Fallujah we stopped delivering in December 2003 because we'd received one too many active warnings, not by the American military, but directly to us, that we shouldn't be doing this.
It's a very dangerous place.
So in fact, it was quite simple. We decided not to deliver any more money, or we were told not to deliver any more money, and simply their regional, the Al Anbar regional central banking authority had to drive to Baghdad, to the central bank in Baghdad, and pick up its own money and do its own exchange. And it had to bring its old money in order to get the new money delivered. So it was a self-governing process in Al Anbar, or in Fallujah.
What
anyway.
was your most exciting moment in this currency exchange? I mean, in terms of day to day.
It seems strange to say, but human nature is such that we always look back on the good times, and I loved the enthusiastic locals, and it was just lovely to be on the street, because our job physically, when the money was in these trucks being delivered to each bank that we were going to, we wouldn't actually handle the money. The actual money was handled by Iraqi bank officials itself. We delivered the money and we guarded it. And my job, in part, was to make sure that the bank was expecting us, but also that that they weren't expecting us so exactly to the point that any bad plants in the bank could turn around and capture the money and drive off with it. And so we were hanging around on the streets whilst the physical bank men were moving the money in. And so we could go to the barber and get our hair cut. We could go to the sweet shop and talk to the sweet shop people.
Lovely.
We could talk to the policemen, to the boys on the streets, and just seeing the enthusiasm and the excitement
Yes.
and the opportunities that they wanted.
Right.
We were all foreigners were considered to be Americans, so we were referred to as Americans. So, Mr. American, please get us a job. Fantastic. You know, when are you going to give us jobs? Which was great. They wanted to get to work.
Well,
After a bit, it was, why haven't you given us a job? And, you know, why aren't we getting any jobs? And that was an indication that from the ground up, we could see the opinions forming or being formed for the people who were passing on these messages to us. And that was an arbiter of the future.
Second concern is the issue of the whole issue of how relationships between the West and the local Iraqi and how they work, and what the misunderstandings we get from local people. Foreign investment has helped redevelop the Iraq economy. Although 95% of the economy is reliant on oil, there are other lucrative investments to be made. Is the cultural clash an obstacle when it comes to international business, or can this be overcome? Do you need to be business savvy as well as having cultural sensitivity to overcome this? It would seem so. It is this simple sensibility to cultural differences that solves all. Not only are Iraqis kind and forgiving, excusing and helping the Westerner with his cultural insensitivity or sensitivity, but with Britons they share Schadenfreude. That is a pleasure found in another's misfortune. Put simply, we can both laugh at one another. Therefore, we don't always need to teach each other about our own cultures. Coming into contact with one another, we find we actually share cultural attributes. It is this that helps trading, along with sound judgment and mutual respect. So the issue, well, the cultural clash, call it what you will. Now, you were going to tell us about this.
Yes. William, it's very simple. I operated in Iraq as somebody who just went there for a short contract to do the currency exchange we've just discovered. But I saw a blank canvas. But also, I had no business experience, no commercial experience in the Arab world. I'd done a little bit of work on privatization of the Egyptian paints and chemicals industry, but that was so unrelated, so unrelated to being on the ground and stimulating an economy from zero. Yes. With a terrific opportunity, because whether you like it or don't like it, when America's Department of State and sequestered most, or if not all, of the Iraqi foreign reserves or money overseas, it used them for its own purposes, which was reinvesting into Iraq to stimulate the Iraqi economy. Now, America, along with its own significant financial contribution, plus other governments with contributions, pumped a huge amount of money into Iraq. And for a few years, in the early 2000s, Iraq was a darling economy. Yes. And on the news, if it wasn't on the news every day for atrocities going on, it was on the news for the potential for to develop it, to redevelop it into the economy it once was, where in fact there were more than £3 to one Iraqi dinar 30 years ago, and now and it went down to 2,000 dinars to £1 at one stage. And a significant devaluation. So there was a lot of upside, as well as, of course, Iraq being about 95% of its economy being reliant on petroleum. It was deemed a suitable asset base in business terms for big investment to go in. So I saw a huge opportunity, and it was irresistible, and meeting the locals was a critical component of that.
And the culture clash you talk of, where does that show itself mostly for a businessman?
The easiest examples to use are where I went wrong right at the start. If you meet somebody from a different culture, and typically in the Arab culture you eat using your wrong hand.
Sure.
We have been brought up and told this is cardinal sin number one. You're condemned to hell. You're going to fail in whatever objective you've got. However, not at all. You've got the most polite, courteous people sitting around the table with you who either will pretend not to notice or, better still, they will assist you in integrating into their own cultures.
Yeah.
So eating becomes very easy once you understand. The second side with eating and drinking is very important in Iraqi culture, is the difference in culture over conversation. In Iraq, your conversation is, as I'm sure, William, you experience elsewhere in the Arab world, the conversation is before you actually eat and after you actually eat. When you eat, eating is about eating whatever's on the table. Eat it hot, enjoy it with your silence.
Really? Is that would you say that was a cultural rule in Iraq?
Very much so.
So one I've failed in then. That's yes.
We all like to natter away, and it would be a mistake to be nattering away too much. But you can get a metaphorical rap on the around the knuckles, and I have done on a few occasions, because whilst I'm normally not overly loquacious, it is almost impossible not to talk when you eat, because we've been told it's polite.
Yeah. And
because eating is something we've all done at least 3 times a day for all our lives, we just get on with it. So there we go. And that sort of culture side is very different, but I found it very easy to be helped along the way. Another side is Schadenfreude. Iraqis, probably as a surprise to many people, including the Kurds as well as the Arabs, share the same sort of sense of humour as we've got. They laugh at the same type of jokes, and none more so than if a mistake is happening at somebody's expense, there will be a roar of laughter from the people, the local people you're with, and it's a sort of thing where normally in our own societies we too would laugh, but where we would withhold ourselves out of deference and politeness to our hosts. But in fact, by participating in roaring with laughter, you're showing a huge assimilation. It's a very easy thing to do, and it's been obtained just by, or the knowledge has been attained just by watching first. It's something I think maybe British people should be quite good at doing. We should be quiet and subservient naturally, and any nation which is good at providing services and good at being in the service industry. Physically, it could be in house service to your lords and masters. We're naturally good. You sit, you watch, you learn how to please, and you get on with things. And then, by degrees, you start to participate more and more. And this spins through into business practices as well. Yes,
yes. On the other hand, people in the Arab world have a real expectation of very formal saying hello and saying goodbye. They make a meal of, particularly of saying hello, of salam alaikum, kaif halak, kaif sihatak, kaif alayla. They're asking you how you are in detail, and you're vice versa, which we don't do. So we're regarded as impolite because of our failure to greet properly, and over polite if we can be when on the other side of the coin, when we could always say please, thank you, and sorry so excessively.
William, I completely agree with you, but equally, if you linger too much, on your greetings, on having a few cups of tea
Yes.
and just general chit-chat, you may find your host turns around and says, well,
Yeah.
come on, William, come on, Mark, what are you here for?
Yeah.
And they want precise information and details, and you can be very taken aback, caught unawares, and leave with your tail between your legs if you haven't prepared what you want to take up their time for. They want an objective, they want a result from each meeting, which is contrary to the way that, again, we'd first been introduced to dealing with typically Arabs, where we were told, ride out into the desert, go and meet the Bedouin in his tent, just hang around drinking cups of tea and eating goat for a few days, and then go home and wait and see if you have an answer to whatever you wanted to do, and if you don't have one, then go back a month or a year later and see what happens. Not like that at all. They want to get on with life, they want to get on, achieve, be successful, and at whatever level they are in society, success is measured in a different way.
But there is nonetheless, the business of drinking tea, the business of, I mean, to refuse entirely a cup of tea or whatever and not accept something from your host is wrong, isn't it? And then you have to, there's the thing I was always told, you should take either 2 cups or 3, but not just one, and not more than 3. But I don't know whether that's...
Well, William, I think we've probably both been sort of brought up in the same generational way by our generation before us. Right there. I found it be a bit more relaxed than that. You'll be guided. The tea is or water or whatever soft drinks are produced on demand, and just by showing a little bit of empathy, by biding the right amount of time, and the judgment call on that is that if you take too long or you take too short amount of time of preamble, then you're going to be guided by your host. I think the way forward here is being guided, and and that the person you're meeting is going to be determined enough to get the most out of you, as you are, to get the most out of him or her, and they're going to help you along.
Gosh, and of course the culture of hospitality shames us sometimes. That can be excessive. I mean, people will go out of their way to feast you and fete you in a way when you're a comparative stranger, and notably with poorer people too, will often go that extra mile in their generosity.
Absolutely, it is extraordinary, and it's, I think, a salutary lesson for all of us in our societies, where I believe, and it's not a subject for necessarily for today, but I believe there's a fundamental breakdown in the way that we over here in our society treat people. And there are huge lessons to be learned by removing anybody, any busload of people that one could meet on the street, plant them in the middle of, let's say, Iraq, and introduce them to people for a 2 days worth of cultural integration. I think the people over here would be absolutely astounded how generous, friendly, honest, straightforward, inquisitive the people they meet are. Also, because genetically, many people they're going to meet, especially in rural communities, won't have had access to very much formal education. May not be able to write. They might be able to read. Their brains are very active. They're stimulated. Their memories are superb. Their knowledge of history, including British history, is going to be very good. Their knowledge of all the members of most of the Premier League football teams is going to be pretty good. And their knowledge of cricket may not be so good, or which jockey's
well,
going to win the Grand
so.
National.
No,
but they are fascinating in their ability to extract from you what you didn't think they were going to get. And the takeaway for the busload of people over here, it can only be positive to our own society. And so I'd argue that we've moved on and away from family values.
I'm sure that's true. And you're I mean, we need to get back to that point. We don't cherish family values as we should. But this sense of loyalty to the tribe, to the family, is very, very key to Iraqi and Syrian society.
Well, I think we'll be coming to that a little bit when we start talking on the banking side, because banks aren't just the formal institutions we see behind closed doors. But back to the general family loyalties and things, the traveller is a welcomed person. It's culturally imbued into all, not just Arabs, but most Asian cultures, that anybody passing through their patch of land or area of power is to be welcomed.
Yes, yes.
Including somebody who may evilly turn out to be somebody that is not wanted, the drug smuggler or the terrorist. But initially they're welcomed in, and that of course is a marvellous thing to do, because the information, the intelligence gathered by knowing who is in your area is something that we could well do with having in our society, but they've got over there.
And so we used to do it a lot better than we do. I mean, in days gone by, we were much more open in terms of welcoming the stranger. It's in
a society where family values count and connections to neighbouring families count, even if you're warring with them at one level, whether you're meeting them through religious occasions or in the hospital clearing up after a particular family feud, you're learning an awful lot. Neither of your families, be you friend or foe with your neighbours, wants unwanted outsiders in there. They want outsiders in there. They love outsiders. They want new skills. They want new bloodlines. But they don't want the wrong type of person. And they know what's going on. And it's so sensible to operate in that sort of environment, so that when we operate in Iraq and we're doing business with locals, we know who the locals are. We know that we can trust them if we interview them properly and meet the families and things. They won't want to let their families down. They may be tempted to let us down, but if we can go and talk to their families in the same way that that they would be discussing amongst themselves, we can generally persuade people to behave in a sensible way. We've learnt and adapted our commercial practices to fit in with what works best for them, and we have ensured that our local staff, suppliers, it doesn't matter who they are able to benefit from us being there. And there's only a point in a foreigner trading in a country like Iraq if he is providing benefit to the locals. Of course, the foreigner wants to take a profit away, but I'd argue very strongly that that behaving morally correctly and profit go hand in hand.
Which we didn't always do, did we? I mean, we had many. I mean, there were security companies. I know you subsequently you've remained in Iraq, and you have a credible record in your time in Iraq. But there were security companies that would drive people off the road, and you had to. And I remember it well, because we'd be driven off the road ourselves by some of these guys who came tearing down enormous trucks, really.
The Middle East does not use ordinary banking in the same way as we in the West use it. Whereas we can declare bankruptcy and have limited liability. In Iraq, there is, in reality, no such thing as limited liability in a Western sense, because family responsibility makes a debt of honor. It is through having good relationships that businesses are established. Local suppliers trust that they will get paid. They trust those to whom they sell goods won't go out of business. It is then our responsibility to honor this trust and actually make sure that we as Western businesses meet our debts. We cannot rely on our Western legal structures in the Middle East. Loans are not commonplace in Iraq. People pool their money together to fund ventures. Although this could be seen as limiting, it does also limit instability, huge debts, and financial crashes. Banking, well, it is the same and not the same. We still have this system, don't you, of money exchange, of ancient money exchange, whereby somebody in Baghdad can take money and be reimbursed in Beirut, and there's no transaction involved.
The Hawala system is simply marvelous. I have never experienced or even heard of anybody who's experienced of a failure in that.
Really?
Whereas and that's whether that's through domestic transfers within Iraq, or from Iraq to next door countries where, let's say, there were formal banks in the early days. Our own business banking was very difficult in Iraq, and we had to rely on some forms of Hawala, or indeed truly internationally, in that there was an Iraqi-backed London firm regulated by the City of London, in which one could use to transfer money to and from Iraq with all the right checks in places. It was virtually instantaneous, and it worked, and the fees were less than that of the banks. If I give, by way of example, an early days example in 2005, we were in the extraordinary predicament where we had contracts with the American government to provide services in Iraq, and this was assisting the security of the Green Zone in Baghdad, and we had that most extraordinary thing called with bomb-sniffing dogs teams, and you may remember those days. Well, the American government had only a system to pay us in cash, actual folding, smelly, new dollars. We were then left in the predicament, having received at our office in the middle of Baghdad a bundle of cash for our services each month. If we received cash for our services in the middle of Baghdad, we then had the extraordinary dangerous activity of, dangerous in a physical way as well as in a commercial way, of getting it to a bank, one of the few banks that would work internationally, that would receive our dollars and give us a receipt, and would then be able to somehow magically, through the banking system, transfer it outside Iraq, typically to a neighbouring Arab country's banking system, which would then transfer it into the Western system, which would then allow us to pay our at that stage,
you didn't use the Hawala system,
well,
in this context.
The Hawala system business opportunity from the London-based company probably arose because of their own awareness that people like us were having such a great difficulty. We were actually in a arguably a more fortunate position, because at least we physically had the cash. But for about the only time in your life you look at the cash and you think it's absolutely useless, because what can we do with it? It's not worth it until somebody's risked their life to get it to the bank. And then we trusted the banking system. Our London office at one stage was chasing a significant payment which we needed, and we were on the edge of going bankrupt at one stage, literally, because whilst we've been paid by the Americans in Baghdad, so nobody owed us any money, we couldn't pay any of our suppliers because the money reached the Baghdad bank perfectly okay, 100% intact. The money was then transferred into the international system, and 4 months later we still couldn't find it, or at least the banking system couldn't find it.
What is I mean, just going back to this Hawala thing, I mean, what's the largest sum of money normally transferred by Hawala?
I'm not an expert, William, but I believe that different Hawala agents will have their own limits. So the sort of the inner circle of Hawala people, and I'm only an occasional user of the system, will have their own limits. I don't know. I know the largest sum that we've transferred was, I believe, at one stage going out of Iraq, not using the London system. Before that existed, was $60,000, which was a comfortable.
So if you're able to transfer amounts of $60,000 through Hawala, I mean, the other thing about an unregulated system like that, it's one of the reasons that you can never really regulate financial sources of money to terrorism, because it exists completely outside of anybody's purview.
It seems to me to be quite wild, quite impossible, and not just a grey area that should remain grey. It should almost be an accepted that there is one official system and another system.
Well, it's no choice, but it does mean that international terrorism can do whatever it likes.
I think it doesn't necessarily mean that international terrorism can do what it likes, but I think a way of governing international, or a way of monitoring and clamping down on international terrorism by looking at official money transactions in the same way that I'm sure drugs barons don't pay through the normal banking system, cannot be an effective way of doing that, of control.
Gosh, so and other things you would like to see more Western-style banking in the Middle East? Do you feel there's a need?
I'd like to see it. There's a bit of a conundrum because if we take at the moment, I think it's Germany, there are negative interest rates going at the central bank. Well, maybe it's even starting to happen over here. I think we did hear once about it in Japan 20, 30 years ago. But you put it out of your mind and you think it's something that happens overseas. It may even be the Bank of England.
Well, it's absurd, isn't it?
But
really?
But the thought of having to pay to deposit your money, and the longer you leave it on deposit, the less you get back, is anathema. However, if we start with Iraq, when we did the currency exchange, we go full circle here, some people would drive their pickup trucks in from the desert, and they had literally dug up the money that they'd had, or brought it out from under their equivalent of their mattresses, and brought it to the bank to be exchanged. And it was exchanged for new money. That new money wasn't left in the bank.
No.
It was taken straight out to the desert again and buried, put under the mattress, whatever, and used. It worked. It's a system that worked and has worked.
We haven't seen, well, we have seen one famous banking collapse in the Middle East, haven't we? Pre the fall of Saddam, there was one in Jordan, I believe. But by and large, well, indeed, there was one in the Gulf as well.
The Gulf, the BCCI collapse. But these were Western banking systems run fraudulently. Where a bank is run honestly and runs out of money, that's just because of lax systems.
But in fact, we haven't seen a collapse. We didn't have any echo of the vast collapse we had here.
No, and this is what I was really interested to bring into the conundrum here, because without banks, your average Iraqi, your average Arab, your average person on the street is operating with whatever cash they have. If they want to start a business, they round up a few uncles and aunts and gather some money, or work with their brothers and sisters, pool their money and operate. Debt is informal, borrowing is informal. The money is shared amongst the people who need the proceeds from the business, presumably equitably, or they'll fight it out.
Yeah.
So where there isn't a fight, and most of the times, 99 times out of 100 there isn't, it's equitable. Therefore,
so there's a better system, you'd argue.
There is a better system.
They don't need Western banking.
Why should it be needed? However, when one looks at the young getting onto the ladder and expecting to progress career-wise, the young who have been exposed to all the modern forms of communication, social media, they've got pretty good internet connections, mobile internet and mobile phones, they can speak around the world, they're part of the global village, they can see what's happening in other countries where people will go to the bank to typically borrow money to buy their first house where they can live in, so that when they get married and want to start a family, they can have some independence.
And you don't have that culture in Iraq so much with the banking.
There is borrowing, there are mortgages given,
but not on the same scale.
Lot of the equity has got to be put in before some loan will be given, and it appears, but again I'm not an expert, that independent security is provided. So
but it is actually,
daddy or uncle is providing
in some ways
security.
It's better if lending is not so free and easy as in the West, because what it does then to us is it pushes up house prices simply because the money is accessible to do it, isn't it?
Absolutely, and the banks become what politicians call too big to fail, which is a disaster. And London at the moment, with a depressing outlook on house prices, is yet with some quite significant borrowings going ahead, is not looking so good at the moment. So there is an argument that perhaps there shouldn't be lending.
The Middle East is better off without us.
But Middle East may well be better off without it. But one can't help but feel that that the twinkling eyes of people starting their own commercial ventures would be fed better if they could borrow and expand. You're starting off as a car dealer. How can you afford more than 1 or 2 cars? But you need 20 cars. What a pity that they couldn't borrow to get those cars going. And if the banks were, the formal banks were to be able to see through the barriers to lending, then these businesses would be able to get going. And I've always thought that the risk of lending to the Arab world has got to be a lot less than the risk of lending in our world.
Yes.
Let's say that we go out of the Middle East, we want to borrow a lot of money from our Western bank. The bank, if it did lend to us, would expect us to pay it back. It would try to go beyond the limited liability and get personal guarantees and so on, and we'd still try to wriggle out of that. In their community, if you're borrowing off somebody, if a businessman is going and borrowing off a bank and cannot pay, the bank would logically go to the family and say, it's a bit of shame on the family that you've got a failure in your midst.
There's no escape.
Can you please help us out? Which is the antithesis of the American society, where failure is a degree of failure in growing your business is potentially seen as a badge of honour. Because if you failed, at least you're trying, and you'll be given another opportunity to try. So it works both ways round. So the conundrum is, which way should work? Which way is best in the Arab world? And we're not here to resolve that, but simply, I'm here simply to say, I find it strange that that banks as businesses haven't seen the opportunity to do what I see as quite a low risk and actually lend to businesses to get going.
Mark, thank you. Well, that's maybe where we have to leave it. Our time is running out, but really, thank you. That's a fascinating thought to end with. We do need to, well, a blessing or a curse. Modern banking for the Middle East.
That's the subject in itself.
Well, William, it's a delight to be here with you today, and thank you very much for inviting me on.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Well, what have we got to say about that? It's interesting, isn't it? The whole issue of the clash of cultures between the West and the Arab world. And yet, is it a culture clash? There is, I mean, all I have always felt is that in the Arab world there's such a far greater tradition of hospitality and of care for one another, and that we in the West have lost something of that, and we need to learn from the Arab world. If we're going to build the kind of society we need to leave to our children. And the Arab world must watch out, else if it becomes too westernized, it'll lose that beautiful, caring society that it is something to be admired and respected. And then banking. And that is so interesting, isn't it? Does the Arab world want Western-style banking? Is it a blessing or a curse? In many respects, for the West, it has been a curse. You know, I mean, after the profligate collapse of Western banks, our children's children will be paying off the debts our bankers have accrued over the years. Yeah, it astonishes me. People talk about banking being a great asset to the City of London. What greater curse, what greater burden can our children bear? I mean, and our economy today, our own, in the UK, our own Chancellor of the Exchequer is talking at the moment of an extra, on top of all the cuts we've made thus far, an extra £4 billion worth of cuts a year for our economy here in Britain to endure, just in order to help pay back these vast debts that were accrued by profligate banking in the West. So you look at that, and you think, does the Arab world need Western-style banking? And yet, on the other hand, the other side of the coin is that, yes, people do want to grow and have businesses that grow and have a way forward. And yes, they do want the modern world with all its advances. They do want that credit culture. So perhaps there's a compromise in there somewhere, an Arab-style form of banking that is perhaps a little more honourable than the banking that we have in the West today, but is still offers the kind of credit system that the world deserves. Fascinating about the money exchange and the fall of Saddam. Many extraordinary things happened after the fall of Saddam, and the modern Iraq we have today is well, it's not exactly fit for purpose yet, but let's hope that it soon will be. Bless you. Do send us your opinions. The email address is, of course, on the screen, so feel free to email us your opinions on these issues. And thank you again for being our guest on ANN TV. Thank you for being with us.